Good morning, everybody. This is Patrick Callahan. I'm the president of the Alliance for Excellence in Online Education. It's a beautiful Friday in mid-March. And thank you for coming to this micro seminar. And it's focused on really what you can do to support students and faculty who are in crisis. And as you know, this pandemic has really put so much stress on so many of us who are involved in online education. College students and faculty members, they're trying to deal with their personal, family, and academic issues. And this is all while keeping up with their coursework. So this seminar will provide examples of how to effectively deal with students and faculty members who are experiencing these personal problems during these challenging times. This seminar is sponsored by Walsh College. We thank them for their use of their Zoom platform and for the great work being done behind the scenes by Dr. Drew Smith of Walsh College. I'd like to introduce first the presenters, and then I'll introduce our moderator. The first presenter is Michelle Szyminski. She's currently an instructor of accounting at Oakland Community College. She is a CPA who earned a bachelor's of accountancy from Walsh College and her MBA from Oakland University. She is the former director of accounting for Wayne County Circuit Court and has been an adjunct instructor of accounting at several Metro Detroit area colleges and universities over the last 18 years. In fall 2020, she joined Oakland Community College as a full-time faculty member at their Southeast campus. She also works as an accountant for a nonprofit organization. Our second presenter is going to be Michelle Ryder-Miller. Michelle is the Social Science Department Chair for Baker College and an Associate Professor. She has been teaching psychology and human service courses for Baker for over 24 years, both in person and in the online format. She's a very passionate advocate for teaching people self-care and how to manage stress in their lives. She has a master's degree in clinical psychology and has over 28 years of experience as a therapist and a consultant. In addition to her role at Baker College, Michelle maintains a small private practice in the Metro Detroit area. Our moderator today is Dr. Sean Moore. Dr. Moore is the Director of E-Learning and Instructional Support at Oakland University in Rochester, where he earned his PhD in Educational Leadership with a specialization in higher education. Along with his staff position, he is a part-time faculty member in the School of Business. Sean was named Oakland County Executive Elite 40 Under 40 in 2017 and won the Excellence in Teaching Award at Oakland University in 2021. His research in online learning in higher education has taken him across the country to present at national conferences. His current research focuses on quality online education and best practices in faculty development, the role of instructional designers in virtual reality in higher education. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Moore, who's going to moderate today's presentation.
Thank you, Patrick. So given how much everyone is struggling during these trying times, we thought it crucial to do our second micro seminar on what people can do to support students and faculty members in crisis. You're going to get a lot of good information and facts here, but just to start us off in a study on prevalence of depression and symptoms in US adults before and during the pandemic, researchers found that depression symptoms prevalence was more than threefold higher during the COVID-19 pandemic than before. So we're going to hear from two wonderful presenters today. They're going to speak for about 15 minutes each, and then we'll have a final wrap-up session at the end where we'll have time for a Q&A. I'm going to put something here in the chat real quick. Put this to all attendees and panelists here. There we are. So we're going to be recording today's session, and our presenters have gathered together some resources that I've linked to there in the chat. You can click on the chat button to get that. We're also going to post that to the A4EOE website. I'll probably post the same link again a little bit throughout for people that join us a little later afterwards. So you're no doubt familiar with Zoom. You'll notice that across the bottom of the Zoom, we have a button for Q&A and for chat. And you can use the chat for comments or quick clarifying questions. And feel free to introduce yourself, send it to panelists and all attendees. You can say your name, your institution, your role in the chat so we can see who's here. Feel free to do that. The Q&A button, what you'll want to do for that is if you have specific questions, put them in the Q&A part so they're not buried in the chat. We'll try to answer those clarification questions during the presentation, but the larger overall questions we'll try to get to at the end. So before we get started, I wanted to acknowledge that the subject we're going to be addressing today is difficult. It might be distressing for some. So this has been a hard year, and that's really an understatement for some of us. It's really important to put your self-care first. If you find yourself feeling upset, that's absolutely normal. If you need to stop, take a break, walk away, please do so. With that said, it's my pleasure to turn over to Michelle Szyminski to get us started.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome. And we want to share with you a very important topic. It should come as no surprise that the unintended consequences of the COVID lockdown have been serious. The three big areas that we're going to discuss are domestic abuse, substance abuse, and mental health issues. Since I teach accounting, I'm a numbers person, so I'm going to share some statistics with you. The National Domestic Violence Hotline contact volume, they trace. And in March of last year, when the stringent lockdown started, there was a 6% decrease in the number of reports to the hotline. Does that mean that the number of domestic violence instances went down? Absolutely not. In fact, quite the opposite is true. The problem was that everyone was locked down in their homes with the abusers, and so there was no opportunity to report these instances. In April, when the lockdown lifted slightly in some areas, I saw a 15% increase in that month compared to April of last year. Oops. An example close to home that made national headlines was in St. Joseph County, Michigan, where there were a preliminary exam conducted via Zoom. There was a man being charged with assault with intent to do great bodily harm, less than murder. It was his third offense, and he was violating a no contact order that was in place. As the proceedings were going on, the assistant district attorney noticed that the complaining witness was acting strangely. And she was able to piece things together and find out that the alleged perpetrator was actually in the same apartment as the victim who was testifying. They were able to send the police to the location, and the man was arrested. He was incarcerated. He made an appearance again just this past week before the judge. And it was brought out that he kept calling the victim from jail to try and get her not to testify. And so, needless to say, he's in deep trouble and more charges are pending. When it comes to substance abuse, to give you a perspective on the level of substance abuse, let's take a look at San Francisco. In 2020, the San Francisco Public Press reported that COVID deaths up through December 16th were 172. By comparison, the overdose deaths in that city were 3.3 times the COVID deaths, and that was only through October 31st of 2020. If we want to focus specifically on students in higher education, we can look at the Healthy Minds Study, which is a biannual survey of both undergraduate and graduate students conducted by the Healthy Minds Network, which is based at the University of Michigan and Boston University. Last fall's survey, students were asked if they had participated in binge drinking within the last 2 weeks. The survey was very specific as to what they defined binge drinking to be based on the type of drinks that were consumed and the number of drinks that were consumed. 60% of students said that they engaged in binge drinking. What's even more alarming is the number of times the behavior occurred in the last 2 weeks. 18% were binge drinking on 3 or more occasions during that time period. And for those of you who are into numbers like me, those percentages, when you add them up, add up to 59, not 60. So that's due to rounding, in case you're wondering. The same study also investigated mental health issues. When questioned about depression, 39% of college students identified as experiencing either moderate or severe depression. For anxiety, an almost equal number said they suffered from anxiety. For non-suicidal self-injury, when asked about that in the past year, close to 1/4 of the students said that there was at least one instance. So this would be things like cutting themselves, something along those lines. For instances of suicide ideation or a plan, it was almost 1 in 5 students reported that they had thought about suicide in the last year. Thankfully, the actual rate for attempts was only 1%. Now, all of us had had the opportunity to take part in training that our institutions have provided us in all sorts of different areas related to higher education. But how many of you have had any training on how to deal with a suicidal student or anyone in crisis for any of the areas that we just discussed? You may be wondering, as an accounting instructor, how am I an expert to be talking to you on this topic today? Well, I'm not. And that's the whole point of this presentation. I don't have a professional background in this area. And chances are, unless you have a psychiatry or psychology background, neither do you. And yet you need to be prepared on what to do if you face a situation like this. So let me share with you what happened to me last fall. I had Zoom office hours right before my class time at 6:30 p.m. Around 6:15, a student came into the Zoom and was apologizing that she had an assignment that she didn't complete. And she said she just was having a bad day and she didn't feel like, she got fed up with the assignment. So she just turned it in. I'm like, well, that's okay. That happens to all of us. It was a small assignment. It's not going to have a huge impact on your grade. She continued talking, saying that she was feeling very, very depressed. So the warning bells started going off. Red flags were raised. And then the student stated, I tried to kill myself earlier today. Well, needless to say, that shocked me, but I knew that I had to do something for her. So I encouraged her to talk. I didn't pry, but I let her express what was concerning her. She said it was with her private life. It had nothing to do with academics. And she was tearing up, not hysterically sobbing, but she was crying. So I told her that I needed to, because she shared this information with me, I needed to identify this to the school and notify the school so that we could get the student help. And the student was receptive to that, thankfully. I asked if the student was in crisis, that they needed help immediately, in which case I would have called the police to get them to the location. The student said, no, that was fine. I tried calling just in case they had longer office hours. I tried calling OCC's counseling office, but it was past hours. I then Googled the suicide hotline and I sent that information to her and kept her talking, saying that I was very concerned about her. I really didn't want her to leave the Zoom session, even though I had a class that was about to start for an exam review. So we made a pact. The student said that they were going to a family member's house for dinner. And we agreed that by 9 p.m., the student was going to email me, letting me know everything was okay. And in the meantime, I was going to try and see what help I could get. So as soon as I was done with the exam review, I started deciding, well, who do I call? So I was looking up my department chair's phone number when all of a sudden I got an email ding, and it was another faculty member who had been assigned to us newbies that semester as to being our mentor. So I was able to contact her directly, and she put me in touch immediately with a counselor. Counselor, again, this is now probably closer to 8:30. The counselor was able to contact me, and I went back and forth between the student, got the student's permission to share her information with the counselor. So I had made sure that I had gotten the student's phone number, and I asked for her location. And it was a good thing that I did that and didn't rely on looking it up in the course roster, because as it happened, the student wasn't at her home, but the student was at a friend's house, house sitting. So she wasn't at the location where I thought the student was going to be. So I was able to share that information with the counselor. The counselor got in touch with the student and spent an hour on the phone with the student till midnight to help the student. I was incredibly impressed with my colleagues and how quickly they responded. And I can honestly say that, at another institution, I might not have gotten that quick of a response. So kudos to them. So the question is, would you have known what to do in that situation? Is it yes, because your college has given you training? Is it yes, that you know what to do even though your college didn't give you training? Is it no, but because you can think on your feet and figure something else? Or would you have no idea how to respond? I will follow up and say that the student did share with me that they were able to get the help that they needed, and happy to report that they are back enrolled this semester and doing well. So that had a happy ending, fortunately. The moral of the story is, although I hope you never have to face this, you need to be prepared, because it's going to come out of the blue. It's going to be after hours, chances are, and the survey. Oh, evenly split about almost a third not knowing how to respond. So hopefully this will give you the tools that you know what to do if you are in that situation. It's going to come at the most inopportune time possible. Not that any time is a good time, but it's going to be as you need to go somewhere, leave. So what can you do? I used to work at Wayne County Circuit Court, and we used to have bomb threats probably every other month. And because they were so common, the administrative assistants had an actual bomb threat checklist next to them, so that if a call came in, they would have ideas as to what information to take down. You have to know, is there a reporting procedure at your institution? Is your counseling department purely academic advising, or is there something more to it that they can refer students to the resources that they need? Do you know what information to collect? So piggybacking off the idea of the court with the bomb threat checklist, I came up with a document for you that we are going to share with you to write down the information if something would occur. You don't have to necessarily keep this right by your desk, but if you had it in a handy folder with you, this will help you from panicking and be able to record the information that's going to be necessary to get the student help. There's a place for you to fill in your college police phone number and counseling phone number. There's a line for where to report to. A lot of colleges and universities have a website that you can go to report instances like if you have student misconduct. For example, OCC, they have a reporting procedure, and they also even have an app called SAFE. There's information to report the name and other identifying information for the student, or this could be used for an employee and the threat made. This area down here that says concerns expressed by the student and employee is not for you to be probing these questions and acting like you're the psychiatrist and trying to figure things out. This is just if they happen to share information, and you can encourage them to be open, but don't try and pry too much. Encourage the person to share the information. You can circle what problems that they are having. For example, is this a result of a death of a family member? Are they feeling anxiety or depression? You're not supposed to identify this like you're diagnosing them. It's just if they shared that information with you. remember that you are not Dr. Phil. You are not prepared or have the background to counsel these people. Your job is to be as empathetic as possible and then direct them to a resource where they can get further help from somebody who is more qualified than you. As I've done this research, one of the themes was that we actually should not be social distancing. Now that sounds controversial, but what we should be doing is physical distancing. The social distancing is harmful. We need social contact in order to be able to deal with the problems that we're facing. We don't want to feel isolated. So make sure that if you are dealing with somebody who is in crisis, that they don't feel that isolation. It's physical, not social. And as we mentioned earlier, we're going to have available downloads for you. We have the incident report form I just shared with you. We have a list of national and local resources for domestic violence, for domestic violence, substance abuse, and mental health issues. In addition, I've compiled a list of campus police phone numbers. I know many of you are adjuncts and you teach at various locations, so you're going to have all this information in one place, easily to access. And then there's going to be information on coping with stress that's going to be presented by Michelle Ryder-Miller, who is going to be our next presenter. So with that, I will turn it back to Dr. Moore.
Thank you, Michelle. Those are some very sobering statistics. As I typed in the chat there, I really like the differentiation you had between physical distancing and social distancing. It's not really anything I thought of before, but I think that's a really powerful way of thinking of it. I'm going to share once more here in the chat the link to the resources. And so you'll have that available. Just a reminder that you can change your chat. When you click on chat, you can change it to all panelists and attendees so everyone can see what you're saying there. If you want to type in some comments, things like that. And if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A. We have some questions in the Q&A that we're going to wait for afterwards, so we haven't forgotten your questions. We're just going to get to those at the end. And with that said, I'll turn it over to Michelle Ryder-Miller for our second half of the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. That was actually such great information on what to do in that kind of a crisis instant situation. So I'm really glad that you brought it up, and it gave me a lot to think about as well. So I really appreciate that. So what I'm going to be focusing on is a little bit more talking about how to respond to faculty, whether you're as faculty or as a supervisor, as an administrator. But first, I just wanted to ask this poll. Did you feel supported by your institution when COVID struck? Did they do a good job? And you can choose all that apply. Does your institution offer an EAP? How aware are you of all the students that are in distress? As a supervisor, did you know how to support your employees? And did you need more support from your supervisors during the pandemic? Give you just another second and then we'll pull up the results.
About 10 more seconds. Okay.
Yeah. All right, well, that's really good to see. So many people felt supported by their institutions, but only 61% understand how much more distress our students are in. And only 44% know that their EAP, that their institutions offer an EAP. And that's really important information for you to look up, right? To find out if your institution offers an EAP. Well, thank you for sharing that. So really briefly, most of what we're going to talk about today are things that you've heard before, right? We're going to talk a little bit about what Baker College did to help employees and students, to help you identify the different types of stress reactions that you're having or may be having, and talk a little bit about exploring reducing acute and chronic stress, both personally and also from an administrative point of view to help people around you. But I can't sum up managing stress in 15 minutes. So really my goal for you today is to have one or two things, one or two takeaways, maybe learning something new, or maybe just learning a good reminder on how to take good care of yourself. So what did we do? What a crazy time this was, right? We were all thrown into this unprecedented situation. It wasn't just stressful, it was traumatic. We talked about the fact, we started in March, almost a year ago now. We put together this I'm stressed, you're stressed, we're all stressed workshop. We talked about the fact that this was affecting all of us in more ways than we could ever have imagined, including the fact that we were legitimately worried about losing our loved ones. I do know that regardless of the crisis, it's important to respond, to say something, to give direction, to give guidance, or to give empathy. And that's really what we discovered in March when we did this workshop, was that everybody was needing to talk about the stress and the chronic trauma that we were experiencing, the worry, the grief. And then it really became worse than we could have imagined, right? So in July, in August, and September, we put together a workshop focusing more on mental health and self-care. We started having long overdue conversations on racial justice based on a man being murdered and having that murder play over and over again on television. So combined with the worsening of the pandemic, which had no end in sight, we have the protests, we have the politicalization of the protests. We repeated this workshop for our students, for our faculty member. We focused also on the stress that people of color are experiencing, as well as the racial injustice in the pandemic. Racism wasn't new. It's finally just being talked about in our day-to-day conversations. Back and again in November, we repeated, and we talked a little bit about, and some staff meetings, on how to avoid burnout, because the stress wasn't going away, it was chronic. So what did we talk about? We talked about stress and trauma. You heard a lot of statistics today about stress and anxiety, depression. We talked about how many people are worried about money and about the economy. We talked about the fact that more than a third of Americans have displayed clinical signs of anxiety, depression, both since COVID and the pandemic began. The text messages to a federal disaster hotline have increased 1,000%. We also talked a lot about the fact that the long-term psychological consequences of a collective trauma like this can last a long time. Then we talked about racial tension. We talked about the statistics showing a correlation between racism and mental health. We talked a lot about racial battle fatigue, the fact that it might be uncomfortable for white people to be talking the racial tension, but it's exhausting for people of color. It might be difficult for people to watch over and over again Black people being murdered on TV, but it's traumatic, personal, and real daily worry and occurrence for people of color. Then we really focused on differentiating the different types of stress reactions that people are having. You know, when we think of stress, we think of the stuff that's happening out here, right? We might think of our thoughts, but very, very rarely do we realize the physiological underpinnings of stress and thus how that can be physically and emotionally exhausting as well. So it's important to understand that we have emotional reactions to stress, behavioral reactions to stress, spiritual, cognitive, and physiological reactions to stress. So when you think about the physiological reactions to stress, our sympathetic nervous system is spectacular, right? It's perfect. Our fight, flight, or freeze response helps us prepare for an acute stressor, to confront the stressor, or to get the heck out of there, right? But what happens when we are under a chronic stress, under a chronic worry? What happens when we're always a little bit on edge or a little bit worried? Put in the chat box for me, how many of you, just a yes or no, still feel that tension even when you're just in a grocery store? Can you put in the chat box if you feel that tension in a grocery store or if you have to go to the doctor's office, yes, you still feel it. Very right. It's still there. And it's not, again, you don't feel like your life is being threatened, but it's not supposed to feel that way. That's that little tiny bit on edge. That's your sympathetic nervous system being triggered a little bit. And that causes our bodies to have to cope with it. And that's that kind of chronic underlying stressor that can be exhausting, both emotionally and physically. So it is imperative to find different ways for you to cope with the different types of stress reactions that you're having. So a couple things to talk about. Remember, coping is individualized. And so what worked for someone else might not work for you. And frankly, what worked for you yesterday might not work for you today. So make sure to always be in tune with how you're doing and try new things. All right? Pay attention to the different types of reactions that you're having. Make sure that you have a coping strategy for that, and make sure that they match. For example, we often hear someone says, just take a deep breath, calm down, take a deep breath. But if you're having difficulty sleeping because your mind is racing, taking a deep breath isn't going to help, right? Maybe journaling or focusing on things that you do have control over, positive thought, positive thinking, those might help the racing thoughts, but taking a deep breath isn't going to help. But if you're really a person who tenses their muscles when you're stressed, deep breathing and doing relaxation exercises would be perfect for those situations, right? So remember, and when I say multitasking, I mean that you might have to tackle a couple of those different types of reactions you're having at the same time. So it's really important to understand the physical reactions you're having, and it's important to understand the psychological, cognitive, emotional, behavioral reactions that you're having as well. Again, one of the most important things I can say is it is imperative that you give yourself a break from that chronic underlying tension that you might be experiencing. Going to the grocery store, just being stuck in your house, although it's so spectacular that it's supposed to be nice sunny weather the next week and nice and warm, get us out of the house a little bit. But just remember that underlying stressor is there and you need to give yourself a break. So I have on the next page a whole bunch of different things that you can try personally that might help you just give your body a break even for 15 minutes. So pick one or two things maybe on the next page that work and write it down. I'm a sticky note queen, right? So write it down on a sticky note and put it in a spot on your computer, on your fridge, on your bathroom mirror that you remember to do it so you can learn that new behavior, learn that habit. All right, let me check the time, see if I have a little bit of time to talk about these. So I'm not going to go over all of these. This is on the last page of that PDF handout that they put in the chat box, so you can remember. You don't have to write them all down. But these are really important things for you to maybe try. Some of them might work for you. Some of them you might find not relevant to you. But go through and take a look. And I'm going to point out a few that I think are actually really important. Let's just start with the first one. Be kind to yourself. We're really good at being kind to other people, being patient with other people, understanding that other people are struggling right now. And we're not so good at doing that to ourselves. So remember, talk positively to yourself, talk kindly to yourself. I think a little bit of kindness even to yourself goes a long way. Anything physical, even just a 10-minute stretching and just running around in place if you have to. Anything physical could help give your body a little bit of a break from that tension. The other thing is I know we're really good at scheduling fun and play for our children. We forget to schedule fun and play. Us adults, we forget to play. So do something to play. And laughing, sometimes if you don't have anything to laugh about, Google YouTube videos of babies laughing, right? Because if you hear babies laughing, you can't help but put a smile on your face, and that helps physiologically take you down a notch. One I want to point out here in the middle, don't sponge. I say this all the time, and this is one that's really important. And I'm going to check with you in the chat box in just a minute to see if you can relate to this as well. So what I call sponging is people who have a lot of empathy and really care about other people, and people come to them and they talk about things. There are people who have a tendency to kind of sponge up the other person's angst. So someone's really upset about something, they kind of draw you in and you get just as upset and anxious and worried and tense as the person. And it's not even your anxiety. It's not even your tension, but you kind of sponged up their angst. Tell me in the chat box, can anybody relate to that? Oh, yes. Yeah, that it's really important. So if you're a sponger, right, which is a really spectacular thing, that having that kind of empathy is spectacular and necessary. Just make sure to watch that and ask yourself, if you're feeling tense, is that my tension that I'm owning, or is that somebody else's? And so have empathy, but you don't have to actually feel that anxiety and stress yourself. Absolutely. Sponge baths are good, but that's not where we're going on that one, Sean. All right. Dancing, playing, singing, learning new skills, helping others, setting those little daily goals. How about changing our pajamas occasionally, right? These are all things that are important to focus on. And I also want to say, reach out if you need to. If your reactions, if your stress is becoming overwhelming, you are not alone in that. As you can see by all the statistics, it is physiologically changing to the body to be exposed to this type of chronic stress over and over again. And please make sure to reach out and if you need additional support. So what can you do professionally? As we were talking about this, getting ready for this workshop, we really were discussing the fact that people are experiencing this differently. Some people are just in their house and they're working from home and nothing has changed for them. And they're enjoying the extra time with their kids. So to remember that as a supervisor, remember that everyone may be experiencing this differently. And that even if you're kind of doing okay, it's really important that you ask how everybody else is doing, to stop and ask how your colleagues are doing along the way. Make sure that you're familiar with the resources that your institution offers so that you have that information to give somebody else as necessary. If you see good articles on reducing stress at work, pass them on. And I'm going to skip that acknowledge the difficult bullet point and just come back to it in a minute. And as an employee, contact HR and find out the resources that you have available. For example, the EAP. Don't forget to seek help when it's needed. As a psychologist, that's one of the hardest things for me to do personally is I like to be self-sufficient. I like to be independent. I don't like to admit when I need help, but it's actually really important to remember to seek help when it's needed. Like I said before, we're all experiencing this, but all of our experiences might be a little bit different. And seeking support might help you realize that you're not alone in this unprecedented time. So really quick, I'm going to touch on what I mean by acknowledge the difficult. Sometimes it's really hard to acknowledge that elephant in the room, that fact that this is really difficult, because we don't like to talk about things. We don't want to bring anybody down. We don't want to make anybody sad. But when you're avoiding talking about the difficult, that elephant in the room can be really difficult and stressful to deal with. When you acknowledge something that's difficult, it allows everybody to really understand that we're all in this together. And it's a lot easier, frankly, to move forward and focus on the task at hand when we first acknowledge this is difficult and this has been a difficult time. And I know people are struggling. It makes people feel like they are not alone. And that is a really important part of coping. So really quick, which of the following are true for you? Did you learn a new idea about how to best support your employees? Even if it means make sure you have some support resources. Did you learn some new information about how to cope with stress? So we'll give you I think probably about a minute. I hope that, again, that those lists of ideas that are on the last page of that PDF. And so please, if you liked any of those ideas, take a sticky note, write it down, stick it on your wall, stick it on your computer to remember. Maybe you're stuck at the computer and you need to remember to stretch, to do a little bit of walking around. Even just that alone will help take you down a notch in terms of the stress you might be feeling. All right. Excellent. So some people learned some new information about how to cope with stress. and some new ideas about what you can do. And that's all we're looking for, is just a little bit of moving in the right direction. All right. And I'm going to turn it back to Sean for Q&A.
Well, thank you for those great suggestions, Michelle. I picked dancing for what I'm going to do to take a break because it hits so many others. Allow me to play music, stretch, run, laugh at me, connect with my children, that sort of thing. I can't guarantee that it'll change my PJs, though. I don't know if anyone else wants to admit they got something weird on the bottom going on. So, all right, we have some time for some questions now. We have a few in the Q&A. If you haven't had your question put in there, you still have time to do that. I will start off with, is there any research on how to increase the, how the increase in the number of students and faculty taking antidepressant medication? Just
I saw that question earlier, and actually I thought it was a great question. I don't know the answer to that question, but I can tell you that as a private practice therapist, and my colleagues that I know in my private practice, they are slammed. They are busy. It is hard to find an appointment with a therapist. I can only fathom that, yes, antidepressant use and antidepressants, SSRIs for depression and anxiety use has increased probably pretty dramatically.
Yeah, I didn't come across anything, but in that Healthy Minds study, they did indicate that students either had some difficulty or a lot of difficulty, about 50% said that they had some difficulty or a lot getting any mental health help. So the resources available to them, they were finding more difficult to take advantage of that.
Thank you. I see we got some good pants comments coming in. Keep those coming. We have a good question here. This is an interesting one. Should we, or how should we, modify assignments in order to respond to students who are stressed and still be fair to the rest of the class?
Oh, I have lots of things to say about that. Again, great question. And every single institution probably is going to handle that a little bit differently. That would be a question I would say talk to your supervisor about. But yeah, I think it's more important to just to be able to acknowledge with your students too, that this is difficult, and to put a statement in there if there's anything that I can do to help you be successful in this class, for them to let you know so that you know what's going on. And very often students just need to know that you're on their side and that you are there to support them, and they're more likely to be successful than they feel like they're all alone and people have no idea what's going on.
It's hard to weigh, because if you keep granting them extensions, then the work is going to pile up and they're going to have even more pressure on themselves. So you have to be careful and weigh, how you're going to alter that, because you could be then putting them into a worse situation also.
Yeah. Thank you. I completely agree. We might have time for a final question too. If anyone else has anything, they can throw it in the Q&A or the chat.
Deborah,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, Deborah had mentioned in the Q&A just that it's important to acknowledge the COVID and the racial issues. You can't ignore it. That racial tension, the COVID, you can't ignore that. And it's important. Again, it's one of those things that we can't pretend aren't there. It's important to discuss. It's important to acknowledge. You don't have to have the solution, but we do have to be able to talk about it and learn to have those difficult conversations.
Okay, any other questions then? The only question I would have, Michelle Ryder-Miller, is just leadership at Baker. I assume if you just make a quick comment regarding, the support that you had gotten or getting from leadership, because obviously you need that to make sure that these programs are, impactful and fully funded, and you're able to reach the desired outcomes you're looking for. So I'm just curious if you could make a comment about that.
I actually think that the request for these workshops were coming from the leadership. It's not that I went to the leadership and said, hey, can I do a workshop on stress? And again, this happened March 26th. And I think our last day open was March 17th last year, March 16th maybe. And so it happened fast. And the request is coming top down. The recognition that we need to support our faculty, we need to support our students, we need to support each other. The administration needed support, right? It wasn't that they were all doing great and we're all the ones struggling. We're all struggling in all the different ways. And so it was really important. And that continues. Again, back in November, it came from leadership on one of the campuses to say, hey, I'd like to know if you would revisit this for us.
Thank you.
Well, we got a lot of thanks and great presentations on there. So I want to thank both presenters again, and we'll turn over to Patrick to close us out.
Right. Thank you. Well, we're really blessed to have great membership to support the Alliance for Excellence in Online Education. And so we're going to have a third micro seminar in May. And what we're going to do is we're going to focus on best practices. One of the things that I really wanted to do 18 years ago when this idea was first germinated was to make sure we actually celebrated and thanked those that have stepped up. So we're going to try to do that in our next seminar, which is Friday, May 21st. And what we're going to do is we're going to, for each of our member institutions, we're going to recognize faculty that have in fact stepped up. And so we're going to, there'll be an award ceremony, they'll get a plaque, they'll get a gift certificate, there'll be all sorts of acknowledgement regarding the great work that's being done by these faculty members at each of our member institutions. And then we're going to ask them to present, to maybe provide us insights as to what they've done from a best practice perspective. And so that'll be the focus of our next micro seminar in May. And again, that's May 21st at 10 o'clock. And I can't thank you enough for your support, and I can't thank you enough for those that attended. Please know that this will be available. This is being recorded. This will be available via the A4EOE.org website, and all the material, the recording, and we'll continue to build this wonderful library of information that you can yourself access, but also your colleagues as well. So I want to thank everybody for a great presentation. You can see from the comments, people have really provided some really nice comments. And I can't thank you enough, Sean, for your support in being the moderator, and really for Walsh College. Again, Walsh College is here as a sponsor, and we can't thank them enough for the great work that they're doing to support this. And without them, this would not have been possible. So again, thank you to everybody, to Michelle, and certainly to our sponsor, Walsh College. And we can't wait to see you guys online again. If you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to reach out to any of us. Thank you so much.